steadfastness in the face of hardships. It is really very hard for the Muslims of today to imagine, and much less to endure or even to attempt to endure, the hardships that were borne by the Prophet, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and his illustrious companions in the path of Allah. Books of history are full of stories of their sufferings. It is a pity that we are so indifferent to those events and our knowledge is so poor in this regard. I open this chapter with a story about the Prophet, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, himself to get the blessings of Allah, which are sure to attend his auspicious mentions. 1. The Prophet's, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, journey to Taif. For 9 years, since his selection by Allah for his mission, the Prophet, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, had been delivering the message of Allah in Mecca and making all-out efforts to guide and reform his community. Excepting a few persons who had either embraced Islam or who helped him though no accepting his creed, all the rest in Mecca left no stone unturned is persecuting and deriding him and his followers. His uncle Abu Talib was one of those good-hearted people who helped him, in spite of his non-entering into the fold of Islam. The following years, on the death of Abu Talib, the Quraysh got a free hand and therefore accelerated their sinister pursuits without check and hindrance. At Taif, the second biggest town of Hijaz, there lived Banu Thaqif, a clan strong in number. The Prophet, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, left for Taif with the hope of winning them over to Islam, thus giving quarter to Muslims from the persecution of the Quraysh, and also establishing a base for the future propagations of Islam. On reaching Taif he visited the 3 chieftains of the clan separately, and placed before each of them the message of Allah, and called upon them to stand by his Prophet's, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, side. Instead of accepting his message, they refused even to listen to him and, notwithstanding the proverbial Arab hospitality, each of them treated him most contemptuously and rudely. They plainly told him that they did not like his stay in their town. The Prophet, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, had expected civil, even a cordial treatment and due courtesy in speech from them, as they were the heads of the clan. But one of them sneered, "Hey, Allah has made you a prophet." The other exclaimed with derision, "Could Allah not lay his hand on anyone else, beside you to make his prophet?" The third one jibed at him, "I do not want to talk to you, for if you are in fact a prophet, then to oppose you is to invite trouble, and if you only pretend to be one, why should I talk with an impostor?" The Prophet, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, who was a rock of steadfastness and perseverance, did not lose heart over this check from the chieftains, and tried to approach the common people, but nobody listened to him. Instead they asked him to clear off from their own town and go wherever else he liked. When he realized that further efforts were in vain, he decided to leave the town. But they would not let him depart in peace, and set the street urchins after him to hiss, to hoot, to jeer at, and to stone him. He was so much pelted at with stones that his whole body was covered with blood, and his shoes were clogged to his feet. He left the town in this woeful plight. When he was far out of the town, and safe from the rabble, he prayed to Allah thus:
اللهم إليك أشلو ضعف قوتي وقلة حيلتي وهو لا على الناس يا أرحم الراحمين أنت رب المستضعفين وأنت ربي إلى من تكلني إلى بعيد يتجاهمني أم إلى عدو ملكته أمري إن لم يكن بك على غضب فلا أبالي ولكن عافيتك هي أوسح لي أعوذ بنور وجهك الذي أشرقت له الظلمات وصلح عليه أمر الدنيا والآخرة من أن تنزل في غضبك أو يحل على سخطك لك العتبى حتى ترضى ولا حول ولا قوة الأبكى.
Oh, my Allah! To thee I complain of the feebleness of my strength, of my lack of resources and my being unimportant in the eyes of people. Oh, most merciful of all those capable of showing mercy! Thou art the Lord of the weak, and thou art my own Lord. To whom art thou to entrust me, to an unsympathetic foe who would suddenly frown at me, or to an alien to whom thou hast given control over my affairs? Not in the least do I care for anything except that I may have thy protection for myself. I seek shelter in your light, the light which illuminates the heavens and dispels all sorts of darkness, and which controls all affairs in this world as well as in the hereafter. May it never be that I should incur thy wrath, or that thou should be displeased with me. I must remove the cause of thy displeasure till thou art pleased. There is neither strength nor power but through thee. The heavens were moved by the prayer, and Jibril alayhi salam appeared before the Prophet, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, greeting him with assalamu alaikum and said, Allah knows all that has passed between you and these people. He has deputed an angel in charge of the mountains to be at your command. Saying this, Jibril alayhi salam, ushered the angel before the Prophet, sallallahu alayhi wasallam. The angel greeted the Prophet, sallallahu alayhi wasallam, and said, "O Prophet of Allah, I am at your service. If you wish, I can cause the mountain overlooking this town on both sides to collide with each other, so that all the people therein would be crushed to death, or you may suggest any other punishment for them." The merciful and noble Prophet, sallallahu alayhi wasallam, said, "Even if these people do not accept Islam, I do hope from Allah that there will be persons from among their progeny who would worship Allah and serve His cause. Behold the conduct of our noble Prophet, sallallahu alayhi wasallam, whom we profess to follow. We get so much irritated over a little trouble or a mere abuse from somebody that we keep on torturing and taking our revenge throughout our lives in every possible manner. Does it become people who claim to follow the magnanimous Prophet, sallallahu alayhi wasallam? Look, even after so much suffering at the hands of the Taif mob, he neither cursed them nor did he work for any revenge, even when he had the full opportunity to do so." 2. Martyrdom of Hadrat Anas bin Nadr, radiyallahu anhu. Hadrat Anas bin Nadr, radiyallahu anhu, was one of the Sahaba who could not take part in the campaign of Badr. He very much regretted to have missed the honor of participating in the first and the most illustrious battle for Islam. He longed for a chance where he could make amends for Badr. He did not have to wait for long. The Battle of Uhud came about in the following year. He joined the army with the most determined zeal. Despite heavy odds, the Muslims were gaining the upper hand, when some people made a blunder and the Muslims had to suffer a reverse. The Prophet, sallallahu alayhi wasallam, had posted a band of 50 archers to guard a pass in the rear against the enemy cavalry. They had definite instructions not to move from their position till further orders from him. But when they saw the Muslims gaining victory and the enemy in full flight, they left their position in the belief that the battle was over and it was time to join in the pursuit and get on to the booty. The leader of the band tried his utmost to check them by reminding them of the Prophet's, sallallahu alayhi wasallam, command and solicited them to stay on, but no more than 10 persons listened to him, arguing that the orders given by the Prophet, sallallahu alayhi wasallam, were only for the duration of the actual fight. The enemy cavalry then noticed the unguarded pass in the rear, made a flank movement, forced a passage through it, and fell right on the rear of the Muslims, who were preoccupied with the booty. It was in this state of affairs that Hadrat Anas, radiyallahu anhu, saw Hadrat Sa'ad bin Ma'izi, radiyallahu anhu, passing in front of him. He shouted to him, "Oh, Sa'ad! Where are you going? By Allah! I smell the fragrance of paradise coming from Mount Uhud." Saying this, he threw himself into the very thick of the enemy, and fought tooth and nail till he met his martyrdom. After the battle, it was found that his body had been mauled and mutilated to such an extent that only his sister could identify him, and that barely from the fingertips. No less than 80 wounds of arrows and swords were counted on his body. Those who strive in the path of Allah with sincerity and devotion taste the pleasures of paradise even in this world, and so did Anas, radiyallahu anhu, smell the fragrance of paradise. 3. The Truce of Hudaybiyah and Story of Hadrat Abu Jandal and Hadrat Abu Basir, radiyallahu anhum. In the 6th year of Hijrah, the Prophet, sallallahu alayhi wasallam, along with his companions left for Mecca to perform Umrah. The Quraysh heard of the news and decided to resist his entry into Mecca even as a pilgrim, and so he had to encamp at Hudaybiyah. The devoted Sahaba, 1,400 in number, were however determined to enter, even if it involved an open fight, but the Prophet, sallallahu alayhi wasallam, viewed the matter differently and in spite of the Sahaba's eagerness to fight, entered into a treaty with the Quraysh, accepting their conditions in full. This one-sided and seemingly ungraceful truce was a very bitter pill for the Sahaba to swallow, but their devotion to the Prophet, sallallahu alayhi wasallam, would not allow them to demur, and even the most valiant man like Hadrat Umar, radiyallahu anhu, could not but submit to his decision. According to one of the articles of the treaty, converts to Islam during the period of the truce were to be returned, but not so the deserters from Muslims to Quraysh. Hadrat Abu Jandal, radiyallahu anhu, a Muslim in Mecca, was suffering great persecution at the hands of Quraysh. They kept him constantly in chains. On hearing about the arrival of the Prophet, sallallahu alayhi wasallam, in Hudaybiyah, he escaped somehow and managed to reach the Muslim camp at a time when the truce was about to be signed. His father, Suhail, till then a non-Muslim, was the envoy of Quraysh in the negotiations for the truce. He smote Hadrat Abu Jandal, radiyallahu anhu, on his face and insisted on taking him back to Mecca. The Prophet, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, represented that, since the truce had not till then been written, its application in Abu Jandal's case was premature. Suhail, however, would not listen to any argument and was not inclined to leave his son with the Muslims even at the personal request of the Prophet, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and would have foregone the truce even. Abu Jandal, radiyallahu anhu, counting his hardships remonstrated at the top of his voice but, much to the grief of the Sahaba, the Prophet, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, agreed to his return. He however enjoined patience on him saying, "Do not be distressed, Hadrat Abu Jandal, radiyallahu anhu, Allah will shortly open a way for you." After the truce was signed and the Prophet, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, had returned to Medina, another Meccan Muslim Hadrat Abu Basr, radiyallahu anhu, escaped to Medina and besought the Prophet's, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, protection. The Prophet, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, refused to accept his implorations and, in deference to the truce condition, handed him over to the two persons who had been deputed by the Quraysh to claim him. He, however, advised him as he had advised Hadrat Abu Jandal, radiyallahu anhu, to be patient and to hope for the help of Allah. When Hadrat Abu Basr, radiyallahu anhu, and his escort were on their way back to Mecca, Hadrat Abu Basr, radiyallahu anhu, said to one of them, "Friend, your sword is extremely fine." The man was flattered and took it out from the sheath and said, "Yes, it is really very fine, and I have tried it on so many persons. You can have a look at it." Most foolishly he made over the sword to Abu Basr, radiyallahu anhu, who immediately tried it on its owner and killed him. The other man took to his heels and reached Medina to report to the Prophet, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. In the meantime Abu Basr, radiyallahu anhu, also arrived. He said to the Prophet, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, "O Prophet of Allah, you once returned me and absolved yourself of the truce obligations. I had no obligations to fulfill and I managed my escape from them by this trick, as I was afraid of their forcing me to forsake my faith." The Prophet, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, remarked, "You are a warmonger. I wish you could be helped." Hadrat Abu Basr, radiyallahu anhu, came to understand from this that he would be returned to Quraysh again when they demand him. He therefore left Medina and fled to a place in the desert on the seashore. Abu Jandal, radiyallahu anhu, also managed his escape and joined him there. More Muslims of Mecca followed, and in a few days quite a small group of such fugitives gathered in the wilderness. They had to undergo untold sufferings in the desert, where there was neither habitation nor vegetation. They, however, being bound by no treaty, proved a great nuisance for the Quraysh by dealing blows after blows on their caravans passing that way. This compelled the Quraysh to approach the Prophet, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and beseech him to intervene and call the fugitives to Medina, so that they might be bound by the terms of the treaty like other Muslims, and the caravans might pass in safety. It is said that Hadrat Abu Basr, radiyallahu anhu, was on his deathbed when the letter sent by the Prophet, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, permitting his return to Medina reached him. He died while holding the Prophet's, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, letter in his hand. No power on the earth can make a person forsake his faith, provided it is a true faith. Moreover, Allah has given an assurance to help those who are genuine Muslims. 4. Hadrat Bilal, radiyallahu anhu, and his sufferings. Hadrat Bilal, radiyallahu anhu, is one of the best known of the galaxy of Sahaba as Muezzin of the Prophet's, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, masjid. He was an Abyssinian slave of a disbeliever in Mecca. His conversion to Islam was, naturally, not liked by his master and he was, therefore, persecuted mercilessly. Umayyah bin Khalaf, who was the worst enemy of Islam, would make him lie down on the burning sand at midday and would place a heavy stone on his chest, so that he could not even move a limb. He would then say to him, "Renounce Islam or swelter and die." Even under these afflictions, Bilal, radiyallahu anhu, would exclaim, "Ahad the One, Allah, Ahad the One, Allah." He was whipped at night and with the cuts thus received, made to lie on the burning ground during the day to make him either forsake Islam or to die a lingering death from wounds. The torturers would get tried and take turns, Abu Jahl, Umayyah and others, and vie with one another in afflicting more and more painful punishment, but Hadrat Bilal, radiyallahu anhu, would not yield. At last Abu Bakr, radiyallahu anhu, bought his freedom, and he became a free Muslim. As Islam taught implicitly the oneness of the Almighty Creator, while the idolaters of Mecca believed in many gods and goddesses with minor godlings, therefore Bilal, radiyallahu anhu, repeated, Ahad, the One, Ahad, the One. This shows his love and devotion to Allah. Allah was so dear to him that no amount of persecution could distract him from reciting his holy name. It is said that the urchins of Mecca would drag him in the streets, with his words, Ahad, Ahad, ringing in their wake. Look how Allah rewarded his steadfastness. He was to have the honor of becoming the Prophet's Mo'zin. He was always to remain with him at home and abroad to call out the azan for his salat. After the Prophet's death it became very hard for him to continue his stay in Medina, where he would miss him at every step and in every corner. He therefore left Medina, and decided to pass the rest of his life striving in the path of Allah. Once he beheld the Prophet, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, in his dream saying to him, O Bilal, how is it that you never visit me? No sooner did he get up than he set out for Medina. On reaching there, Hadrat Hassan and Hadrat Hussein, radiyallahu anhum, the Prophet's, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, grandson, requested him to call out the azan. He could not refuse them, for they were very dear to him. But as soon as the azan was called, the people of Medina cried openly out of their anguish at the memory of the happy old days of the Prophet's, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, time. Even the women came out of their houses weeping. Hadrat Bilal, radiyallahu anhu, left Medina again after a few days and died in Damascus in 20 AH.